Hello, everyone. Randy Harrington here. I'm bringing you this interview from someone who, this is in his own words, um, a Bigfoot hunt that he was a part of back in 2002. I became aware of this story probably 12 years ago, and I'm glad to share it with you guys. You guys will have to take it amongst yourselves, whether or not this sounds believable. Whether you think he's telling the truth, I do not know. Uh, I do know some of the participants in this outing. So, if any of you know MK Davis, then maybe you can shoot him a message and ask him to give you his version because the gentleman actually speaks the name of MK Davis as being present when this happened. Okay, I hope you enjoy this.
My name is Jake. The following is my account of an experience that occurred years ago. A lot has happened and changed with my perspective since then, but one thing has remained constant, and that is that night in Louisiana, the Bigfoot involved was a flesh and blood entity. This all happened in January of 2002. I was invited on a Bigfoot hunt down in Louisiana. It took place at a 1,500 private tract of property in northwest Louisiana, some miles south of Shreveport. There were three of us involved in attendance. The three of us friends were in attendance at the invitation of the landowner named Jim. It was his family who owned the property. Myself and my companions go by the name of Jake for myself, Derek, and William. None of us were hunting lease members on this property. Also, this account is my personal viewpoint of everything that happened that night. It may not be 100% perfect, but it is my recollection of the events. Derek and I arrived at 3 o'clock on Friday afternoon, and as we slowly drove into the camp area, Derek remarked, "It isn't too late to go back home." And what precipitated that comment was the first sight of one of the hunting lease members, Rick, sauntering from around his tent with a Budweiser in one hand and a single-shot 12-gauge shotgun in the other. We didn't find out until later that another gentleman who was running this outfit, Mike, wouldn't let him even load the thing. Also, another hunting member, Richard, was observed pulling on a whiskey bottle while toting a Marlin 45-70 lever gun. Our friend William would not be coming in until later that night, and we didn't want him to be blindsided. So we'd have blown the entire deal off at that point. In retrospect, this turned out to be how things would come out later. The evening's hunt turned out to be uneventful, as all of the hunting parties involved got cold and radioed to be brought out prior to 2100 hours. The weather for that weekend was mostly clear skies with slight breeze during the day, with temps in the low 40s at daytime and the mid-20s for nighttime lows, which with almost a dead calm wind. The moon was at the apex of its full phase. The layout was for 100 to be positioned in a tree climbing stand up on a rise, a quarter mile above the main bottom area, where a recent roadkill deer carcass had been placed beside a field road adjacent to a creek crossing. There were 2 to 4 climbing tree stands in that immediate vicinity. The next day, Mike gave us a general layout of the place along with a new plan for that evening's hunt. Derek and William were to be in climbing stands across the creek, 50 yards from the carcass bait, with an additional attractant consisting of pheromone scent, which we had brought, placed in cotton balls hung in a small thicket of river cane located between their positions. I was to take up a spot immediately on the bait location with a guy named Randy, 30 yards behind me up in a pine thicket with a high-dollar video camera perched in another tree stand. One of the problems were the type of stands themselves, as they were the tree lounger models, which were almost impossible to shoot from, as lateral and opposite side mobility were very limited, if non-existent. I had recently had an MRI that revealed a herniated disc in my back, and coupled with the stand design, problematic issues made for my decision to use a ground blind 20 yards from the bait. Plus, I felt better able to defend myself, if need be, from that position as well. The camera guy, a member of the Caddo tribe from Anadarko, Oklahoma, was to have taken the spy tree stand spot up on the rise above us. There was a gentleman named Doug, who was reputed to have been some sort of military sniper with 14 confirmed kills, and was carrying an HK Model 92 in a 308 with a 40-round clip and high-quality glass atop it. However, he threw a hissy fit at being left alone on the ridge with no backup, and insisted upon being with his campmate, camera guy Randy. The end result was I was to go back to the camp area with Mike and take the late night watch on the carcass spot, as the sniper guy went up the pine tree adjacent to the deer carcass location. We had no more gotten back to the camp area, 1 mile away, and sat down at the fire when a single shot shattered the still night air. On the radio, the sniper saying, "I got him," with William and Derek screaming to shoot again. But there was no second shot. I guess it was the manifestation of his one shot, one kill mantra. Unfortunately, he foobarred the shot, and instead of hitting the Bigfoot squarely in the back between the shoulder blades, as he tried, he gut shot it at a lateral angle. Then the cluster began its endemic cycle. Several of the hunting members were the first to arrive at the carcass scene. They immediately proceeded to walk, stomp around in and around the bait carcass, and in the process contaminated and destroyed much of the forensic evidence in that spot. When Mike and I got there, one of the first things was I told them to back away from the immediate scene, yet a couple of them persisted in tampering with things. Then I went across the creek and assisted William and Derek out of their tree stands, and we hustled back to the bait location. A quick examination revealed the Bigfoot had made its way from the immediate area back into the brush, which consisted of a 3 to 4 year old clear-cut jungle consisting of 200 to 250 acres of 6 to 8 foot tall pine trees, greenbriers, box elders, and other assorted heavy vegetation. The Bigfoot had apparently belly crawled up to the carcass and grasped it by the snout, intending upon dragging it back into the thicket, as evidenced by the shored up leaves ground cover against its back and clear indentations on the deer's snout, caused by the Bigfoot's fingers as it clamped down on the carcass. William was literally screaming for a Coleman lantern, but none of the hunting members present apparently had the foggiest notion of why he wanted one. Finally, M.K. Davis showed up in his Toyota pickup and took William back to camp where he retrieved a lantern. Meanwhile, the sniper and camera guy had beat a hasty retreat back to camp and were hiding there, as according to their later statements. Their later statements said, "We were afraid the rest of the Bigfoot would come back and tear up our camp." With the lantern ablaze, William, Derek, M.K. Davis, Jim, Gary, and I went into the brush to track the Bigfoot down. The rest of the hunting lease people were told to stay put on the field road, and Mike, Josh, and a couple of others went to the top of the rise to try and head off any escape through that direction. We had gone 50 yards into the area when I came upon a greenish-yellow substance the size of a pencil eraser on a leaf. Then I located several more a few feet away, followed by several drops of blood of almost the same size. These samples were tagged and bagged, and we proceeded on a few yards, coming upon the creek to my right, where it had apparently bent back to the west. We later, the next day in the light, saw that this bottomland creek meandered all over that area, as the night's foray into the brush was our initial venture into that location. At that point, there was a large 24 to 30-inch diameter tree blowdown immediately in front of us, from which a series of low growls began to be heard. I moved right and crossed the creek in a move to flank the downed tree and get a view from the tree trunk's lateral position. As I eased down the bank, skid marks were noticed where I was getting down to the creek bed, with an almost perfect handprint impression on the opposite bank, 6 to 8 feet away, where the Bigfoot had caught itself moments before. Also at that time, noise was heard from either flank as two more probable Bigfoots began moving in direction towards us in an apparent attempt to come to the aid and rescue. The sniper later mentioned that there was another larger Bigfoot standing a few yards to the right of the one he shot, and had also heard another one behind him a few minutes before the shot. Derek and William also commented that Mike and I hadn't even cleared the rise ridge in his truck while we headed back to camp, when a series of screams were emitted from the cutover, and they could clearly hear footsteps as the Bigfoot traversed the creek bottom, headed to the deer carcass, and even stopping at the pheromone bait chip to check it out before proceeding to the deer bait. Again, the style of stands prevented either of them from getting a clear view or shot at the Bigfoot, plus the full moon at their back. We presumed Derek and William probably stood out like beacons up in the oak trees lit up by the moonlight. At that point, Gary was instructed to watch my back, and he had a lever-action .45-70 rifle from his position on the other creek bank, as one of the other Bigfoot was making a direct line in off my right side. Derek, M.K. Davis, and Jim were with William, the first two guys covering the left side, where the third Bigfoot was approaching, and peering into the blowdown for any sign of the wounded Bigfoot. As I moved to get a better look down the tree trunk, a movement caught my eye behind the far end of the trunk, near where the root wad base was sticking up out of the ground. It was hard for us to see well, for our illuminated equipment was mainly hunter-type headlamps, plus the glow from the Coleman lantern tended to night blind us to a certain extent. Then a blackish object headed away from the tree in a northerly direction, and I raised the Remington 1100 with double-aught butt and 24 rifle sight barrel, and began tracking it. As I swung past a large 30-inch diameter pin oak, I fired at what appeared to be the Bigfoot's head, for by now it was in quad mode and quickly moving away from us. At that point, Mike radioed for us to back out of the scene, establish a perimeter, and wait for daylight to go in and finish the deal. Also, when I fired, the other Bigfoot began moving lateral to our position and making quite a bit more noise than before. A concern for us was that some of the hunting guys might get antsy and begin spraying shots about the area as well. Given the fact that Gary had the appearance of going into shock, his eyes were almost totally glazed over, and we had to almost carry him out, added to our concerns for the state of mind of the other guys had at that moment. Keeping in mind that here we were in a strange location with people we didn't know in a highly charged situation, and also mindful that alcohol was already a major component in the situation, and it made the idea of focusing upon securing a wounded Bigfoot a daunting task, to say the least. A perimeter line was set up around this area, with people building and maintaining bonfires at intervals to discourage exit from the cutover by the Bigfoot. Several instances of large animals moving around in the brush were heard throughout the night. Then a hunting lease member, which was a dentist from Oklahoma City, I think, situated in a 14-foot deer stand tower up on the middle of the ridge overlooking the clear cut, radioed that he detected something moving from the area where I had fired the shot and was headed almost straight at this position, some 500 yards away. He was using a thermal imager which had an 800-yard range. He radioed a constant stream of reports, such as it was moving on all fours, then upright, then stopped, then laying down. His radio continued to report the progress from the Bigfoot eventually coming out of a clear cut and headed for a crossing of the fire lane, 75 yards west of his position. Mike, Josh, and Tommy were beating a path to intercept the Bigfoot when the dentist radioed that the thermal imager batteries had just failed. A couple of the members had been playing with the thermal imager all evening before, and apparently putting fresh batteries in had not been on their mind. So after a few minutes of pandemonium, Tommy showed up at the deer stand tower with fresh batteries, and the thermal imager was operational again. Then, according to Tommy, who was now using the thermal imager, the Bigfoot suddenly dropped and became a log just across the fire lane into the adjacent tract of uncut pine timber. Back then we were pretty green when it came to equipment such as night vision and thermal imaging technology, but have since learned there is no way a log could give off enough heat after a 40-odd degree night or 40-odd degree day with a current ambient temperature of 26 degrees to register a thermal imager the quality of one used that night. Needless to say, the next morning we went back into the area and no carcass was to be found. Another hunting member led this search, and he sped through the area almost at a gallop with a total disregard for intensive searching for even any residual evidence. Derek and I did locate where the Bigfoot had curled up under the blowdown tree trunk and secured another blood sample in the process. There was supposed to have been a casting made of the handprint found that evening by one of the hunting members, but I have doubts that this was ever done. We left headed back for Oklahoma later that day, totally exhausted, and had been up for 38 hours and dreading the 6-hour drive back home. The three of us was asked by Mike to come back down there a second weekend thereafter and conduct a thorough search of the entire 1,500 acres in an attempt to locate the carcass or anything thereof. Mike and another member allegedly found a substantial blood sample in the vicinity of where Tommy had reported the log in the evening of the shot. A portion of this was again allegedly sent off for DNA analysis to a laboratory in Texas, with the preliminary findings listed as unknown primate classification. There was supposed to be further analysis performed by this lab as well as one in New York, but this is where things get murky, and a shroud of secrecy and disinformation has since permeated the entire event. Our 2-day search turned up nothing of substance except that Mike's son, Josh, kept 3 times appearing by my side while making sweeps through the various tracts of the area. Later I was suspicious, as he was directed to bird dog me just in case anything was found. Again, things weren't quite on the up and up, as we have since surmised in subsequent reflection on the entire event. In summary, Mike's place is a veritable hotbed of Bigfoot action, and it is a mystery to rival the Trinity as to why one hasn't been taken, except that if our experience is any type of indication, greed, unpreparedness, and general incompetence were catalysts of the events, and in my humble opinion, the approximate reason for the outcome that transpired. The mystery continues. One thing's for sure, M.K. Davis had to have his balls in a wheelbarrow because he was unarmed and went into the thick brush after a wounded Bigfoot. At least M.K. Davis was the bravest of us all.